Okay, thank you for coming. Today, here at Center for Policy Research, we are pleased to have a book talk on how the BJP wins, inside India's greatest election machine, by Prashant Jha. Prashant Jha is associate editor at Hindustan Times. He's actually an old friend of CPR. We see him here quite a bit. He's been a longtime contributor to discussions here on Nepal, on Indian electoral politics. His first book is called Battles of the New Republic, Contemporary History of Nepal. And as somebody who teaches in political science departments, I can tell you that in undergraduate courses, his book is actually used quite a bit to give people some introduction to what is happening in Nepal. So it's a wonderful book for those of you who have not read it. But today we're here for a second book. And this is a book that is based on extensive field work in Bihar and Uttar Pradesh, in particular UP. We'd actually had a chat about, whether this book would be written early on. And one of the things that is really impressive about this book is that I think often we think, when a journalist is going to write a book about his or her field notes, it'll just be, sort of a long form version of the articles that showed up in Hindustan Times. What people will notice when they read this book is that there's a lot of material that has been added that doesn't show up in the press. And I think one of the lasting contributions of this book will be a very detailed discussion of the organizational structure of the BJP today, and how it's helping it win elections. So beyond just sort of thinking about what voters are doing and how they're, thinking, there's a larger sort of discussion about the various actors in the BJP and how they work together. So just to sort of ground this discussion before I turn it over to Prashant, we're in a very special time in Indian political history. We have a dominant party in the Bharatiya Janata Party, but we also have a party in the BJP that has recast itself. It was seen as a party of the elite, of the upper caste, and this is one of the first books that is talking about what we're going to refer to as the subalternization of the BJP, this sort of ability to read, to sort of attract the poor, to attract lower castes, in ways that the BJP hasn't been able to do before. With that, I would just like to let Prashant give us a brief overview of his motivation for writing this book, how he went about thinking about what he wanted to put in this book. So, Prashant.
Thank you, Neelan, for having me at CPR. As I keep saying, this is like an intellectual home for so many of us who have kept coming here, often for advice and guidance from Pratap, who is not here anymore, but I think will always remain here in some form, as well as other colleagues. Neelan, to answer your question, I covered, as he mentioned, the 2014 elections, the Bihar elections, the UP elections, and the UP elections were quite an immersive experience. I spent over 75 days in the state in the run-up to the elections, and while I could anticipate that the party had an edge, BJP had an edge, I could not quite anticipate the scale of victory. And when I came back, and when one was confronted with this astounding result, I began to think about the election a little more carefully. And I remembered something that the former Rashtrapati, Pranab Mukherjee, had told me in a conversation which I think now I can share. When I had asked him about an upcoming election, he had said, "You can only understand an election after the election is over." And I thought that was a very profound statement. And I thought that maybe this is a good time to look back at certain elections. Along with that, of course, we are witness to what I think is a remarkable moment in Indian politics, the dominance, and some would call it the hegemony of BJP. Do note that post 2009, this was a party that was being written off. Even in 2013, I think very few people would have anticipated that this is a party that could not only capture the central government with a majority on its own, but also be in power in over a dozen states on its own and in 18 states with allies. So this is a party that is right now that is dominating Indian institutions in an unprecedented manner, and it has done so legitimately through elections. So I think the idea behind the book is to understand what is it that is propelling BJP to victory after victory. And the challenge, and then what I was very clear I didn't want to do was I didn't want to write a moral science textbook. I did not want to write about how BJP is either a good party or a bad party. I did not want to get, be a part of, this is a polarized moment in Indian politics, and there are a set of people who are in so much awe of BJP, as Arun Shori put it remarkably, the North Korean channels who do not see any flaw in the BJP and who think everything that the BJP does turns to magic. And then you have people who are consumed by their hatred for BJP, that they become bitter, and I think they are unable to even understand how the BJP is able to succeed. So I knew that, and the way to do it for me was do it through bottom-up reportage and just focus on what one has seen on the ground and what the party has been doing, rather than get into taking normative positions of whether what it is doing is good or bad. Right? So that was how I started out, and I must credit my editor and publisher Chiki Sarkar of Juggernaut, who really framed the question for me when I was discussing the UP elections. She said, the question is how does the BJP win, and the book is an attempt to answer that. And I know over the course of the conversation we will get into the different strands that constitute the answer to that question, but that's what the book attempts to do.
Thank you. So, one of the conditions of having Prashant over here is that because he's such an old friend, we told him that we will only allow him to speak here if we're allowed to give him a very hard time. So, I encourage you all to help me in this task. I think what I can do today is, from at least a somewhat academic perspective, force Prashant to take a few positions based on the material that's in the book, um, and hopefully we can have a lively discussion based on this. Uh, so, uh, sort of a device that I'm going to use throughout this discussion is something that academics always do, right? When we are thinking about how voters behave, um, we say, okay, imagine that there is an individual in the polling booth. What is it that ultimately enters into his or her mind when the vote is cast? Right? So the problem is that we can think of a large number of explanations. In fact, if you just think of, charisma of a leader, party organization, ideology, everything, it's a superset of all of the explanations that might take place. And part of our job is to try to understand parsimoniously what is happening in this moment. What are the things that are actually driving changes on the ground, right? So some of the discussion today will be structured as a set of puzzles that we sort of came across in UP, and how this book sheds light on it, and how Prashant responds to these puzzles in light of what he's written. So, the first puzzle I want to start with, and this is something, Prashant and I we both spent a lot of time in Western UP during this most recent election. And, one of the things that was quite noticeable is that the farmers were already quite upset, right? And there were a lot of farmers who were very upset about demonetization, very upset about what was happening to their crops. We heard at various points various caste groups like the Jat saying, we're no longer with the BJP. There was a lot of video and a lot of discussion, even from the BJP leadership, with whom both of us engaged, and they were also quite worried about what was going to happen in Western UP. Now, understanding election after it's been completed, we now know in the first phase of the election, which was in Western UP, the BJP had a 90% strike rate. In fact, it's almost identical to how it performed in 2014 when it swept the state. So nobody really saw this coming, including the BJP's own leadership on the ground. And Prashant, when he discusses this moment in the book, he talks about the idea that the BJP has, in response to a jibe of calling this BJP government Soot Put Ki Sarkar, has become a party, or a party of the poor. And Modi in particular has transformed himself into a Garibo ka Neta, a Neta of the poor, leader of the poor. Now, what I want to sort of push Prashant on is he actually gives two competing narratives as to how this happened in this book. So one is that the BJP and its research wing uh, looked carefully at what it is that farmers want and did a lot of research, did a lot of surveys, and then sort of picked some logic of, we are going to bail out farmers, we're going to give farmer loans. Another logic that's explained is that Modi is somebody that a lot of farmers and a lot of the poor in India identify with. And so Modi was able to recast demonetization and various other policies as being particularly pro-poor. This is actually a classic debate in political science. Do people look at the policies in front of them and decide, or do the leaders that they already identify frame those policies for them? So I'm wondering, Prashant, if you can shed some light on what you think happened in UP at that stage, and how does that fit into your narrative of Modi recasting himself as a pro-poor leader?
I always knew this would be the toughest conversation I would have while doing this set of book promotions. No, I think that's an incisive question, Neelan, and there are many strands to that question. So let me take it one by one. The first is the larger image transformation of Modi, right? If Modi was a Hindu leader between 2002 and 7, and if he became a Vikas Purush between 7 and 15, while retaining the image of a Hindu leader, I would argue that he has become, or at least projected himself as a Garibo ka Neta since 2015. Why was 2015 important? It was important because of the Soot Boot Ki Sarkar jibe, which personally stuck and hurt him. It was important because that was the year when they had to withdraw from proposing amendments to the Land Acquisition Act because they were seen as pro-corporate. It began with Delhi, it ended with Bihar, and the party then went back to the drawing board and just tried to understand that why was it that after the 2014 tsunami, within a year, their connect with the larger electorate had diminished. And the conclusion that they drew was that we need to reinvent ourselves. We cannot be stuck in the old BJP image of being seen as an urban, upper middle class party. Now, how was that image transformation effected? The first was through demonetization and the narrative around demonetization. And I was reporting in November last year from UP, from the poorest districts of UP in Purvanchal, and one could sense immediately that there was extraordinary public support for it. And this was because there was he had tapped into latent class resentment, hum pareshan hai par humse zyada pareshan hai, or there was expectation that there would be tangible benefits which would eventually come to the poor. Now, I think till the elections happened, February, March, this enthusiasm for demonetization may have shifted to indifference, but it had not translated into outright hostility. So I think that remained a strand of support. The other, and the other was the projection that this government had been more effective on welfare delivery. Whether it is more effective on welfare delivery is something, again, Yamini and Avni and others at Accountability Initiative will know far better than I do. But the perception on the ground was that they have delivered on Ujjwala, they have delivered on Jandhan, they've opened accounts, they've done well on toilets, and so this is a government that thinks about us and that वो नीचे के लोग के बारे में सोचते हैं. This perception had grown, and a lot of this one had picked up, but one had not connected till the results were out. So some of it is, I think, maybe looking at it in retrospect. But if you say all this, then what explains Western UP, right? So I'll come back to your puzzle there. When we were in Western UP, the farmer thing had not struck me as much as the Jat thing. We know that this is a region of high Jat concentration, and I misread Western UP completely because what I was picking up from Jats is that they were angry. They had voted after, remember the Muzaffarnagar riots that happened in 2013. This had given a huge boost to the BJP, which had inflamed passions and had stoked hatred right after the riots and during the riots. In the 2014 elections, the raw CSDS data says that 77% Jats voted for BJP in 14. But what we were hearing both at the end of 16 and early 17 from Jats was that this had been a government that had been unfair to them. They had not respected Chaudhry Charan Singh. They had thrown Chaudhry Saab's family out of their residence in central Delhi. The Prime Minister had not tweeted for Chaudhry Saab's birth anniversary, that they had not got the Jat boys who had been picked up during the riots out of jail. And so there was this litany of complaints. So what one had assumed was that the Jat vote would have shifted. That did not happen. And when Amit Shah said at the end of two phases in a press conference in Lucknow that we would get 50 out of 73 seats, all of us mocked him. They eventually ended up getting 67 of those 73 seats. So they really swept Western UP. Now, when I went back to Western UP to try to understand what had happened, there were two or three explanations. The first was there was a very high degree of communal polarization that happened at the end. And if you remember, there was an audio tape of Amit Shah that was released. We thought that showed Amit Shah's desperation, but in retrospect, it could well be timed right before the election, where he's telling Jats that, look, we know you are unhappy with us, but if you don't vote for us, who's going to come to power? And who's going to come to power was not just a hint at SP, but Muslims. Look who's going to come to power. And we have been together and we have been on the same side for 600 years. So who have we been fighting for 600 years? So all this was unsaid. And what I picked up from Jats was that they felt that in the morning they saw Muslims line up to vote for SP. And so by the afternoon, Jats realized that if we don't vote for BJP, the SP is going to come back, which would mean an upper hand for Muslims. So I think there was a very high degree of communal polarization. This happened late, and this happened even on that day where the machine, which we will talk about, was playing its part in deploying deploying, I think, this message. The second also is that it's not only the Jats who inhabit Western UP; it's also the other castes, be it the Sainis or the entire Kuswaha Maurya Saini Kashyap group, right, and many other backward communities. So I think the BJP was also able to reach beyond the Jats to many of these smaller communities, which was scattered, and was able to get their vote. So both a degree of communal polarization, careful social engineering, and the message that, look, you may not like us, but it's the Muslims who will rule if you don't vote for us. All of that, I think, played a part in shifting the mood at the end.
But I mean, just to push you right back on that, does the BJP have a superior message, or are they just better at selling it?
Well, I don't know how you would classify superior, right? So if you are telling somebody that, look, you hate the Muslims and we hate the Muslims and let's vote for us, I don't think it's superior in quality, but it is more effective messaging, and it's being able to tap into certain latent prejudices that exist. But on many other elements, they do have the fact that they have been able to cast themselves as both a pro-rich party and a pro-poor party. The fact that the upper castes feel comfortable with them, and so do the backward communities and Dalits, and they have been able to a certain extent, Dalits. The fact that they are today they've been able to carve out both a multi-class and a multi-caste alliance. I think that speaks of their superior messaging and a more effective, of course, delivery mechanism.
So thank you for the very detailed response. I mean, I think so. What's nice about this is that Prashant and I think we've had a lot of conversations about this stuff. So this is in some sense sort of opening up some of the arguments and discussions we've had to the public, which is nice. So as I mentioned, in the introduction, one of the lasting contributions of this book is going to be a very detailed discussion about how the BJP runs, right, organizationally, and one of the stories we have about BJP hegemony, BJP dominance, is that they have a superior organization structure. They're more efficient at getting to the voter, and I think it would be nice for us to unpack at least some of that here. I would encourage all of you. It's a significant part of the book to sort of read through those chapters in some detail. We won't be able to cover all of it here. I want to focus on one very interesting point that Prashant makes, and he actually spends a lot of time talking about this sort of BJP membership drive that you'll remember that all of us were mocking as a missed call campaign, right? In which, if any number were reached, they were sort of signing people up to the BJP. And, Prashant talks about this moment and talks about the mocking and says, there was something very intelligent about the design of that campaign. And what it was that even when the actual election was not taking place, an actual electioneering wasn't taking place, it mobilized the entire party structure. It kept them beholden to the party. It kept them doing something. It kept them, and it got them fired up when the election finally came around. And one of the sort of simple observations, I'd like to make about what we know about Indian parties and where the BJP seems to be bucking the trend is that parties in India are not particularly good at figuring out what to do or how to stay relevant when they are not in power. They seem to sort of wash away. We're seeing some of that with Congress. We've seen it with CPM wholesale. We've seen it with Mayawati. Um, One of the innovations of the BJP is that even when they were out of power for 10 years, which is a long time in Indian politics, they stayed relevant. They stayed powerful. They actually built a stronger party structure in that time. Actually, a very simple question. Based on many of the sort of techniques you've talked about, and many of the things that Amit Shah has personally done to build the party structure, what do you think that some of the other parties in India could learn from the BJP in terms of party organization? Okay, and to make this a little bit harder, I don't want you to just talk about Congress because they could literally do anything better, everything better, right? But there are other parties that have slightly better party organizations on the ground that are still getting beaten to the punch by the BJP.
Uh, See, so let me begin by just spending a few minutes on what the BJP has done in terms of organization before we talk about what the other parties can pick up maybe. What Amit Shah did after taking over as national president was first focus on quantitative expansion of the party and just focus on the numbers, right? And that's when the missed call campaign came into play. And today the BJP claims it is the world's largest party. I mean, even if you, and larger than the Chinese Communist Party. Even if you discount that as an exaggeration, and even if you, take down the numbers by a couple of million, it's still expanded in a formidable manner in the last 3 years. Take UP and how they expanded in UP. Sunil Bansal is this again one of the invisible organization men of the BJP, and BJP has many of these people. They are the Sangathan Mahamantri, the organization secretary, general secretaries who actually control the party in every state. Even and he was given this task of mobilizing 10 million voters in UP. And before this, remember, the party only had 1.4 million members, and that was done through that offline system of registering them and giving that receipt that we have all encountered at some point or the other. The first thing he did was go back to the booths. There were 1.4 lakh booths in UP in the 2014 elections. In 13,000 booths, the BJP had got no votes. So they felt that these are booths that are dominated by Muslims. They're not going to come. We're not interested in them. Leave these booths aside. They focused on the remaining 1.2 lakh booths, and they asked each booth to enroll 100 members each. All booths did not succeed, but they were able to get 80 lakh members only through this booth level mobilization. Then they asked each member to get another 100 members each. Then they set up, because UP witnesses a high degree of intrastate migration. You have women marrying in other geographies. You have intrastate migration for work. They set up camps at the block level, and eventually they managed to enroll over 1 crore members. They say that they've exceeded that target. Right now, the numbers again can be debated, but I think what that showed was that through the end of 2014 to 15, when there was no election coming up in UP, all the booth committees were still working. There was something happening, and that transformed. The quantitative expansion of the party actually transformed the qualitative relationship between the party at the booth level and the party leadership. They were constantly in touch. This was followed up by a contact campaign, where you were going back to these members and getting raw data from them on where they were living, on their income status, on their educational status, number of people in their families. Now, they were not able to succeed on the same scale as the membership campaign. It's easy to enroll a member through a missed call campaign, then to go and get raw data from them. But again, that kept the party machinery going. Then you had these OBC, Dalit, youth, women. 4 categories were identified, and there were meetings that were held from 2016 up to 2017 for these as categories where which you have to specially target to win votes. And then you had now all parties resort to this, deploying independent survey agencies, getting feedback on the issues that matter to the voters, fashioning your campaign around it, enrolling new voters, because BJP believed that the new voters who would come in, first time voters, there was a higher chance of them voting for BJP, right? And then you had the campaign itself, right? So the early mass contact from November, December of last year, they started something called Parivartan Yatra from each corner of the state. And when I asked the BJP leader, why were you doing this? He said, हमें पता था कि नवंबर में कोई डिसाइड नहीं करेगा कि मार्च में किसको वोट करना है, बट बीजेपी को छा जाना था. We knew that voters would not decide in November whether to vote for BJP in March, but everywhere. It should just be BJP everywhere, every nook and corner of the state, and they succeeded. And then you had the final campaign phase with the Modi Blitzkrieg. So I just wanted to elaborate on this for a couple of minutes, because I think that each step shows meticulous planning, and each step shows resourcefulness, and shows that from the bottom to the top, this was a party that was on its feet. Now, what is it that the other parties can replicate? I would just maybe add a caveat to what you had said. BJP was in power when it was doing this. It is true that BJP, out of power, also has an infrastructure to sustain it, and that is the RSS. And the BJP organization, because it's a cadre-based party, it somehow manages. The BJP was able to do all of this because it had power at the center, because it was infused with this new energy and new leadership, and because it had resources, right? What is it that the other parties can do? I mean, one is just this question of whether a mass-based party can compete with such a cadre-based party, or whether you need to move to a cadre-based system, right? And that's a question that the Congress has to answer, whether it's possible to do it, and what is it that it would take. Even regional parties, we have seen certain regional parties have a strong, well-oiled cadre machinery. The RJD, for instance, the JDU does not have it, as you have seen in Bihar. So I think, that's one question that the other parties have to think about, the mass-based and the cadre-based question, and whether when you have a cadre, would you be able to take care of them when you are in opposition, right? The second is that I think there is no substitute to ground-level contact anymore. If the political action is happening at the booth level, where you are persuading the voter and you are getting the voter out on polling day, and that is really the challenge, right? Everything is built up to that moment. And you have the BJP spending so much resources as well as attention, paying so much attention to that booth committee, and you don't have anybody there, or you have an ad hoc booth committee that comes up 5 days before the election, and you have 6 people there or 3 people there, and they don't even have a full sense of the booth and the demographics of the booth. How are you going to take on this machine? And I think this is going to be, and I know that there is a sense right now, and the government also accepts that the narrative is slipping over the past 4 to 6 weeks. The point is that even as the narrative slips, and BJP is preparing for a day when the chemistry that got the BJP the victory in 2014 may get diluted, but the machine will be there to get the voter out. So to make up, to offset for that dilution in chemistry. And that is what I think the other parties have to. So these are the two things I would throw. Whether to be cadre-based, how would you sustain it, and how to empower booth-level committees.
So, one of the questions I've had about the way the BJP functions is that despite quite a hierarchical structure, low intra-party democracy, much like most of the other parties in India, which means it's not like low-level members are able to decide the affairs of the party, right? The BJP seems far more successful at bringing leaders from the ground up. So one of the things that you notice when you're in a place like UP is that, of course, Modi is, sort of reigns supreme. But they can also tell you something about local level leaders, ground level leaders, people who are just like them in various ways that they look to within the party. Congress seems devoid of such leaders, certainly in a state like UP. What do you think that some of these other parties can do? I mean, one of the challenges of being a cadre-based party, sort of classically, like this, CPM and so on and so forth, is that they actually have a very hard time fulfilling that function, finding leaders or moving leaders up the ranks that the average person can identify with, because you often look at things like service to the party and so on and so forth. The BJP is the RSS, right? What kind of things can some of these other parties do to bring leaders up the ranks?
So, again, I think let's look at what BJP does before we get to what the other parties can do. What the BJP has succeeded in doing, and I think this is an art of decision making that's so important, how to take difficult decisions yet handhold those who are adversely affected by that decision, or manage the discontent that emanates out of that decision, right? And that you see with the senior leaders. When Amit Shah descended on to UP in 2013, uh, you think Rajnath Singh would have been happy? You think Kalraj Mishra would have been happy? You think Lalji Tandon would have been happy? You think all the BJP UP leaders would have not done their best in sabotaging him? Even in this election, I can tell you that there were many senior cabinet ministers from UP who were praying and hoping that BJP lost the election. And why was that the case? That was the case because the new BJP is creating a generation of leaders which would make this set quite irrelevant. This we saw most starkly in ticket distribution. Including in seats like Banaras South, which was represented by this veteran Brahman leader, and he was not given a ticket. And there was a lot of discontent in the constituency and in the party machinery. And when I asked the BJP leader, why is it that you have removed him? Because he was a short winner. He said that, look, he's old and we need another generation of Brahmin leaders to come emerge. We have kicked up Murli Manohar Joshi from in the Margdarshak Mandal, so we need new UP Brahmin leaders. So they took the risk, gave it to a new guy. The new guy eventually won. So I'm just saying that the success has been of taking difficult decisions, empowering a new generation, or at least creating space for a new generation while not seeing an outright rebellion. And the reason they have succeeded in doing this is because they are in power. So you don't have, the older leaders are not walking out. If there are three adverse electoral outcomes, you will see all these guys consolidate against Modi and Amit Shah. And all these guys who have lost out over the past few years, who may not have got tickets, who do not have that kind of power, basically rally together. We saw this right after Bihar. As soon as the Bihar result came out, the people who were happiest were those in the Margdarshak Mandal. They immediately wrote a letter saying that, this party needs introspection, right? And if they'd lost UP, this would have happened. This is what Congress does not have right now. So Congress has, and the Congress Vice President in particular, just does not seem to take difficult decisions and handhold those.
Who's the Congress Vice President?
Mr. Gandhi, of course, right? Since UP in the Congress circles, it's been very clear that one of the states where you have two states where you have a chance are Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh. What do you have to do in these states? You have to first get your leadership question right. You take a tough decision, either make Kamal Nath or Jyotiraditya Scindia, whoever it is, make that person the head and manage the other 5 factions that you have in Madhya Pradesh and ensure they don't rebel. Has that been done yet? No. You look at Rajasthan, the reason that has that been done, or has Sachin Pilot been given a blank check, and has Mr. Gehlot been managed? That has not been done. So this inability to take decisions and manage the fallout is, I think, one thing that parties have to do. I mean, and that they have to learn from. The other is, I think there is a generational transformation that is happening in each party in India. It's happening within the Congress also. Belated, slow as the process is, and the battle is intense. But in BJP, it's already happened. So, Modi represents a certain generation, but Amit Shah is 52 years old. You are already seeing in BJP the politics right now, except one leader in the cabinet. I mean, it's an open secret. It's the Home Minister who may still harbor some ambitions of leadership. The others have reconciled themselves to a number 2 or a number 3 or number 4 slot in a Modi regime. The competition that's already been unleashed in BJP is for a post-Modi BJP leadership position. And there you have an Amit Shah, there you have a Devendra Fadnavis, there you have a Yogi Adityanath, all of them who in 5 to 7 years will be competing for that slot, right? So that we don't see. I mean, there is a generational transition in other parties, but we don't see it playing out in the same manner.
Thank you for that. Okay, so I know that there are going to be a lot of questions, so I'm going to push to, I think, what is going to be the most controversial part of the book, but is where I think a lot of secrets were revealed, right? So one, so I said, the sort of larger question that we're dealing with here is, how is the BJP transforming itself into a party for everyone, right? How is it a party of the poor now? How is it a party of the non-elite castes? And one of, there are 2 explanations that are given in this book in detail. I mean, there are actually a lot of explanations here. And I want to sort of probe each of them in, with at least some, I'd like to have some discussion on each of them. So the two of these ideas, number one, is that the RSS and Modi are working together much more closely than people realize, actually, and have been realizing. Um, and that has been able to bring about changes in strategy where you are able to balance the aims of a Hindu Rashtra with electoral realities. And there's actually some wonderful discussion. I think you actually had direct conversations with Ram Madhav, and sort of how in states in which the BJP has never really had some presence, how they were doing some of the deal making in J&K and in Assam, to be able to win in places where they don't, and Manipur in places where they don't have much of a foothold or didn't have much of a foothold. But before we get to all of that, I'd like to sort of start with the RSS, right? And one of the singular contributions of this book is that there is a large debate from 2002 onwards about whether the RSS likes Modi, whether Modi likes the RSS, and the connection is overdone. No, it's not. I think you lay that to rest here. The connection is very, very strong. And Prashant makes a very interesting point. I think some of this discussion comes from a sometimes contentious relationship that the Bajpayee government had with the RSS. And he says, that was a different time because Bajpayee was actually older than than Raju Bhaiya, who is the head of the RSS.
Sudarshan.
Sorry. Who was the head of the RSS at that time, right? But Modi has a very different relationship with Mohan Bhagwat, who is the head of the RSS at this point. They are actually similar in age. They're contemporaries. They've sort of led parallel lives. One of Modi's mentors is actually Mohan Bhagwat's father, right? So they actually have a working relationship. They are friends who can go back and forth in a way that didn't exist before. So despite at times looking like there's tension, there is always a release mechanism that allows for some back and forth between the RSS and the BJP. Now, the question that I want to ask is that it's clear that, and I think you've done a very careful job showing how the RSS and the BJP work together, and I'm going to ask you to comment a little bit about that. But you also bring up an interesting point, right, which is that, the RSS strategy and unleashing the RSS seemed to work very well in UP and not as well in Bihar, right? And the point that you make here is that in Bihar, yes, there's an RSS cadre within in Bihar, but a lot of people were brought in from outside, and that didn't play very well in Bihar. In UP, because they learned from their mistakes and because there is more RSS penetration, they were able to rely on sort of homegrown talent. Now, this allows us to ask a slightly more complicated question, which is, of course, the RSS matters to the BJP. It's a fundamental part of their cadre. But based on this story, is it just a case of being able to bring in a big enough homegrown cadre to be able to win an election as opposed to not? Or is the RSS actually adding something new? Of course, the RSS is always going to be a part of the BJP's party structure. But told from one point of view, it is just simply saying, I have a big enough organization in this state and not a big enough organization in that state. And told from another point of view, the RSS is sort of running things in a way and is a strategic advantage for the BJP that other parties don't have. So I was wondering if you can sort of weigh in on that. But start first with what you view as the connections between the RSS and the BJP.
So, to begin with, what is the current dynamic between the RSS and the BJP, right? As Neelan, you pointed out, there was this period of tension when Vajpayee was in power, and we could see that Sangh was not happy with a lot of what the Vajpayee government did, and many people, well-informed people, suggest that the Sangh even went inert during the 2004 elections, or was not as active as the BJP would have liked. The situation now is completely different. I would say there are four broad reasons which explain the convergence and the relatively smooth relationship that exists between the two. Now, the first, as you mentioned, and I highlight in the book, is the relationship between Modi and Mohan Bhagwat. Both were born in 1950. Both became Purnakaliks in 1970s. In the RSS, one became General Secretary of RSS in 99. The other became a state-level chief minister in 2001. One became the Sarsang Chalak in 2009. And by 2013, Modi was on the national stage. So their careers have moved together, and they have a relationship where they can just pick up the phone or meet at night and or in the outside the public glare and discuss things. The second, of course, is ideological convergence, right? I remember going and meeting Ashok Singhal, the late VHP Supremo, in 2013, and I asked him that if BJP is elected to power, what would be your broad expectations? And he said to stop the process of de-Hinduization. And I asked him to elaborate, and he said three things: Gai, Ganga, and Ayodhya. And if you see what's happening right now on the Gauraksha front, it is today a national debate. This has been something that's been very dear to RSS for a very long time. In fact, the formation of VHP was because of this issue. Ganga is not clean, but you have the amount of political capital, energy, resources that this government has invested is probably more than any other government had, just in terms of the optics. And Ayodhya, while nothing has happened till now, you can see that this is moving to the judiciary, and don't be surprised if there is movement on that over the next year, right? So you see that there is a broad ideological convergence also. The third is just smooth coordination. Every ministry is open to RSS inputs. It does not mean that RSS is dictating policy in every ministry, but there is definitely a relationship where they are receptive. There is a lot of personnel appointment that we saw to a certain extent even in the Vajpayee era, but I think we're seeing more of it now. And the fourth is the assertion by the Prime Minister of his Hindu identity. And an RSS leader told me that the last Prime Minister who used to do this was Indira Gandhi in her last term, where she used to go to temples so frequently. So you have a Modi going to Kedarnath or to Vishwanath or to Pashupatinath and coming out with the Tika, and basically this echoes the old RSS slogan of Garv se kaho hum Hindu hai, right? So I think there is this broad convergence. This does not mean there aren't fault lines, but there is a broad. Now, what does the Sangh do during elections? And I think there are two broad things that it does. The one is stuff that we know, which is it deploys its network of pracharaks for quiet voter mobilization, getting the voter out to the booth. Again, this is identifying potential voters, favorable voters, spending time with their families, using the relationships that pracharaks already develop. At the Zilla level or at the at the block level, if pracharaks have a rule, you don't go and have a meal in the same house consecutively, right? So you actually spend time with different families every day, and you build those relationships. These are deep personal relationships that any pracharak on the ground has, and that's what they use. But the second thing which struck me a lot, because I had not thought about it in these terms, is how the larger ecosystem of the Sangh gets active during elections. So these are not people who you would even think are the Sangh, but the professor in BHU, or the hotelier on the ghats in Banaras, or the trader in Lucknow, or a small businessman in Meerut. These are people who are embedded in their communities, who have influence in their communities and neighborhood, who may or may not even go to the Shakha anymore, but broadly belong to the Sangh worldview and share that Sangh worldview and belong to that ecosystem and have networks there. And they then use their influence to shape opinion in the areas that they inhabit, right? And I think that role is invisible, and that role is as crucial to the. And I mean, the other thing which spans across elections is the fact that the Sangh is the source of the BJP, not only the BJP ideology but personnel. So from Modi to Amit Shah's personal staff, to Ram Madhav, to Sunil Bansal, to the local district in charge, everybody is from the Sangh. So I think this distinction that we make between the Sangh and the BJP is also probably an artificial distinction, where there is such seamless movement. There are tensions, there are fault lines, there are distinct units, there are different priorities, but there is also a very seamless kind of, as one leader told me, ki Sangh hi to my baap hai. So if it's not as if the Sangh is operating completely distinctly from this. You had a follow-up question. Oh, yeah. So the question: why did it work in UP and why did it not work in Bihar? Actually, one way to answer that is that this is only one factor, right? The sung is not the only factor. It's a very complex dish, and in that the sung is one ingredient. And in areas where the sung is strong, it can influence outcomes. In 2014, it was BJP was relatively weak in terms of organization in UP. The sung was needed even more. By 2017, the BJP organization itself had become quite strong. So the need for the sung machinery was lesser. But as you identified correctly, the local sung apparatus was used more than the outsiders who were brought in Bihar, outsiders who were brought in. But the interesting thing is that while the sung is an asset, the sung can also be a liability at times. And in Bihar, it was actually a liability because of that statement that the RSS chief made. And many BJP leaders believe that they may still have lost because the arithmetic was stacked so much in favor of the Mahagathbandhan. But the Sarsang Chalak statement in an interview to organizer suggesting the need to review the system of reservations was immediately picked up by Lalu Prasad Yadav, and we know that BJP's aim was to make it a Hindu-Muslim election, and Lalu succeeded in converting it into a forward-backward election. With that one booklet of Guru Golwalkar that he went on with to 10 rallies every day, basically saying Sangh to reservation ko khatam kar dega. And so Sangh ended up becoming, and BJP was at sea because they knew this had damaged them, but they could not distance themselves from the remark. So, despite all the denials that happened, the message went down that BJP and RSS were anti-backward. And that is something that BJP has done so much, or anti-Dalit, and that is something that BJP has done so much to correct. And that's the lesson that they drew from Bihar, and they did not repeat that mistake in UP.
So, I think that leads into my next one. I actually have a lot of questions about that, but I'll let those go to Q&A later. So this leads into a very natural question about what work is it that Hindu identity is actually doing in constructing this force, right? This sort of hegemonic, dominant power that we see, right? So let me give two, in many ways, contradictory stories about what Hindutva is doing in the book, and sort of ask you to pick a side, as to what you think is going. So again, this is a classic debate in in the study of politics. One is this idea of Hindu identity, the assertion of Hindu identity, ideologically being a Hindu, as a way of bridging caste divides and so on and so forth, and especially a particular brand of Hinduism. Now here you talk about Sangeet Som, who is an MLA from Sardhana. He is largely viewed as one of the key rabble-rousers that led to the 2013 riots in Muzaffarnagar, and is a political force in the area. So this is a situation where Hindu identity is being is being shown, and is a way of mobilizing politically. We can think about the movements around not eating beef. We can think about a lot of things, but they just directly focus on Hindu identity as Hindu identity. But there's another view, and it's actually one that you state towards the end of the exact same chapter, and I'm going to read from the book here in a second. And the setting here is now an infamous speech by Narendra Modi in Fatehpur on 19th February. And you actually draw a different conclusion, and one that I actually agree with, than most of the media at the time as to what was going on in that speech. So let me just read from a paragraph from the speech. It said, Modi continued, I am perplexed. In UP, you ask a Dalit and he says, I don't get my share, OBCs take it. OBCs say, we don't get our share, Yadavs take it. Ask Yadavs and they say only those attached to the family get it. And the rest goes to Muslims. Even we don't get it. Everyone is complaining. Discrimination cannot work. Everyone must get according to their right. This is Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, and the BJP is committed to it. Now this is a famous speech because, Modi ji then goes on and says, that is why if a graveyard, Kabristan, is made in a village, a Shamshan Ghat, a crematorium, must also be built. If electricity is provided during Ramzan, it must also be provided during Diwali, so on and so forth. Now, obviously most of the media, including us at that time, picked up on the Hindu-Muslim aspect of this. But what's interesting about this passage is that and what you also argue here, is that it's not actually about Hindu Muslim as such or bolstering Hindu identity. It is about some notion of economic competition. It is some notion of benefits going to Muslims and not being given to us. And so that's sort of another classic trope, that what's actually driving this is not Hindu identity as such, but it is the notion of actual competition over economic resources. So within this, I'd like to sort of ask sort of two questions. Based on what we're seeing now and what we saw in UP and the rise of Yogi Adityanath, how much do you place blame at the politics of the Samajwadi Party and the kind of politics that the SP is associated with? And secondly, if it is economic competition, then that suggests one set of solutions to deal with some of the language that we're hearing today. And if it's Hindu identity, that suggests a different set of solutions, right? So I would like you to sort of, based on what you saw in UP, we heard a lot of each kind of explanation. What do you think is driving the rise of sort of Hindu identity in UP and maybe across North India that we see? Maybe take a side.
I actually don't think there is a contradiction between the two. I think that if you look at, the language may be cruder when Sangeet Som deploys it, or but if you look at the objective as has been outlined and documented quite extensively on work on BJP, the objective before an election is to make the Hindu anxious. The objective is to make the Hindu the objective is to make the Hindu angry. The objective is to make the Hindu forget his caste identity and think like a Hindu. The objective is to think of the BJP as the party that represents the Hindu interests. The objective is to instill a fear of the Muslim. The objective is to instill a certain sense of resentment against the Muslim, and the objective is to think and portray all other parties as pandering only to Muslim interests. So if you see what Sangeet Som does, when he's talking about how the SP government is making homes for all Hajj pilgrims, but nothing for the Kavadiya. And if you look at what Amit Shah does when he alleges that there is discrimination on the basis of religion in the distribution of laptops, there isn't. But when he alleges this, or when Modi says what he says, I think they are all eventually doing the same thing. Now, Modi said it, and with devoid of context, what Modi said was unexceptional. He was talking about the constitutional duty of a state and of any regime in power. So, I mean, if you just look at the speech and the text of the speech, I think it is unexceptional. But if you look at the context in which he was saying it, Modi is too smart a person not to realize how the speech would be interpreted. And in the same section, I explain how that speech was heard by people on the ground. And people did not think about the idea of the non-discriminatory state. Or if they thought about the idea of non-discriminatory state, they thought of the SP as pandering only to Muslims. And they said, Modi ji theek to keh rahe hain. Bas kabristan kyun bante hain? So, yeah, when we don't have evidence which suggests that it's, that the government has, say, enables the supply of electricity during Eid and obstructs the supply of electricity during Diwali, which is the allegation that Modi is somehow making or insinuating at, right? So, my sense would be that he taps into what may be a certain resentment against the kind of politics SP does, and I completely hold SP responsible for this kind, and the image that Mulayam Singh has cultivated, right, or Akhilesh tried to break away from that to a certain extent, but the kind of image that Mulayam cultivated of that obviously gave ammunition to the BJP and helped them project all these parties as pandering only to Muslims, and thus helped them consolidate the majority. So on one hand, what I saw was that through deception, and all these campaigns are based on lies. Love jihad is a lie. Kerana Hindus migrating because of Muslim gangsters is a lie. Or the Muslim butcher at every street corner slaughtering cows is a lie. The distribution of laptops on the basis of religion is a lie. Or even this Eid Diwali is a lie, right? So it's outright deception that they use to stoke hatred on one hand, but on the other, what I really what struck me was that secularism is dead. There is absolutely no resonance of secularism on the ground. In all these days of traveling both in Bihar and UP, I did not find a single voter use the word secular. I did not find a single voter think about his voting choice through the prism of secular communal. And this may be a voter for Congress who is voting for Congress because his grandfather, while dying, said, please keep voting for this party. Or in old family associations, he may be voting for SP because he's a Yadav or because he liked Akhilesh. He may be voting for BSP because he's a Jatav or he liked Mayawati's law and order. He may be voting for Lalu because he is a Yadav or felt that Lalu still represents social justice. He may be voting for Nitish because Nitish represents good governance. But nobody is voting because these guys are secular. Nobody is against the BJP because BJP, or the Hindu voter is not against BJP because BJP is quote unquote communal. So that framework of politics is not resonating on the ground and it will not get the opposition parties anywhere.
Okay, that was very forcefully said. I'm going to just ask a question that you didn't discuss in your book. And then I'm going to open it up because I think, people have a lot of questions. So you didn't really talk about the media much here. And you are a member of the media. And I'm not sure he's still your boss or ex-boss, has been in the news recently. There's an article floating around today about how politics may have gotten in the way in the leadership of the newspaper in which you run. How much does the media narrative matter here? And how much does control of the media matter here? It isn't that politics hasn't always been a part of media ownership, but this feels different, right? And why? And what is it doing?
So unless Yamini and you are giving me a job in CPR, I'm going to keep quiet about my organization and what's been going on there. No, I think the larger question is interesting. And I think we can stay away from the specifics. No, my editor-in-chief wanted to return to New York. That's the explanation. Ex-editor-in-chief for personal reasons. See, there is... I don't know what you felt during UP. It is true that BJP today is financially the strongest party around. Which means, and we know that the media, and it's not unique to this election or unique to 2014, over the past decade and a half, there is a very clear sense that the media, both from the district level to the state level to the national level, is, we've seen the trend of paid news, has been vulnerable to both pressure and financial inducements in the run-up to elections. And I'm sure the ad spend, the political pressure, the clear affiliation that certain media houses have decided to adopt, certain Hindi papers, for instance, vis-a-vis particular parties, all of it plays a part in shaping the consciousness of voters. So if you have one of India's the largest Hindi paper in UP batting quite clearly for a party, then it does I think it does play a part in helping. But I don't think it is uniform. I think that to suggest that the narrative is completely controlled by the BJP is not true. We've seen that in UP, right? We did see that and in Bihar, we saw that the SP government was using its own power, and the fact that it was in power in the state helped to push its own narrative. It had control over certain media networks. We also saw a lot of sympathetic accounts of the SP Congress alliance. Even in Bihar, there was the Mahagathbandhan. The BJP spend was much higher than the Mahagathbandhan's, but it was not as if the Mahagathbandhan did not get media space. So I think, it's a difficult question, but what I would say in a nutshell is this: that the fact that BJP today is so strong, both politically and financially, gives it leverage over media, which is also compromised to a substantial degree, both, especially the vernacular media in many states. At the same time, to suggest that there is no space for free speech, there is no space for a counter narrative, I don't think that is necessarily true.